entirely unworthy of a member of the warrior class. "Perhaps our swords can remain sheathed, my brother," one of his companions suggested. His armorial device identified him as a member of the powerful Austrian Hünenburg family. "We have seen no sign of movement in their camp since early this morning, so possibly they took my advice." Several of the other knights chuckled at this remark. They were all aware that the previous evening, on sighting the position where the opposing forces had established themselves for the night, Henry of Hünenburg had prepared a simple note, crept to within a few dozen yards of the enemy camp, then attached it to an arrow and fired it into the centre of the encampment. The brief written communication had simply explained that Leopold's forces would be travelling through the Morgarten Pass the following day, and advised the peasants that their best option would be to return home, put their primitive weapons aside, and not attempt to interfere with their passage. "The problem, as I see it," Henry continued, "is that there may well be nobody over there who can actually read." There were more chuckles from the other armed knights. "But it is true that their camp appears to be deserted this morning," another knight said. "So clearly they must have gone somewhere, and faced with an army of this power and ability, all these experienced warriors—" He swung his arm in an expansive gesture to encompass not only his fellow knights, but also Leopold's entire encampment, where the final preparations for moving out were just being completed. "Their best option would definitely be to run away or hide somewhere." "Perhaps," the first knight replied, injecting a note of caution. "But let us not forget that they do have legitimate claims over this land, claims that were actually agreed to and ratified in the past by our own Habsburg masters, agreements that should never have been made and documents that should never have been signed, I agree, but agreements that definitely exist. Maybe we should not be quite so quick to dismiss them. But whatever the legitimacy of their cause, against us they are powerless. They can do nothing except create a nuisance," Henry of Hünenburg insisted. "We are a trained fighting force, and we outnumber them by more than 10-1. They have no knights to face us, and they have no training and virtually no weapons. If they are stupid enough to offer any opposition, it will be a rout. But I'm hoping that our march past the lake and through the pass will be entirely unopposed. Anyway, we'll find out soon enough." He pointed to the centre of the encampment, where Leopold and his most senior advisers were now clearly ready to leave. Within 20 minutes the entire army, appearing massive and unwieldy when scattered around the makeshift camp they'd occupied overnight, had metamorphosed into an organized fighting force, formed up into regular lines and columns, and began a steady advance toward the shores of Lake Egery. The knights, mounted on their heavily armoured war horses, led the way at a sedate walk, maintaining a slow but steady pace that the foot soldiers could easily match. Placing the knights at the head of the column was a deliberate tactic. They were essentially the heavy armour of medieval combat, virtually invulnerable in most battle situations, and the presence of such a large mounted force would almost guarantee, at least in Leopold's opinion, that the army would be able to continue its advance unmolested. Taking on a single knight, even for a large group of armed foot soldiers, would usually be suicidal. To take on dozens of them, because Leopold had ensured that his army was as strong as possible by recruiting knights from most of the noble families in Austria, would be nothing short of madness. And it looked as if Leopold was right. Their overnight encampment had been only a short distance from the shores of Lake Egery, and within a few minutes the force had reached the water and passed along the shore, heading toward the Morgarten Pass, which lay a few hundred yards ahead. They neither saw nor heard the sound of any enemy soldiers. It was as if the entire area had been robbed of human presence, apart from the dull rolling thunder of the marching and steadily advancing army. In front of them the path began to narrow, but that was to be expected because of the mountainous terrain, and the knights had to spread out into an elongated line, riding only 3 or 4 abreast. That was a slight cause for concern, because along the more restricted path the armoured and mounted men would have little room to manoeuvre.
To keep listening to this audiobook, I've left you a link in the description so you can do it, at no cost thanks to Audible's 30-day free trial.